but let's just dive right into it. So, unlike many historians, you and Bob started your narrative of America's history or America's fall or change with the Gilded Age, a period our audience may or may not be familiar with, and the Progressive Era. And so tell us a little bit about why the story really starts there, and how does that relate to kind of the core message of the book?
Yeah. So the motivating question of the Upswing is, how did we get into this mess? If there's anything that Americans agree upon today, it's that we are in a dark moment. I think just last month, there's a survey question that gets asked every single year and has been asked for many years, which is, do you think America is on the right track or on the wrong track? Um, a historic number of Americans said last month that they felt that America was on the wrong track. Um, so we all, the one thing that we agree upon is that we are in a serious problem. And I like to say that there's been sort of an entire genre of books that have popped up in the last 10 years trying to dissect how we got here, right? And most of those books really focus on a sort of fall from grace narrative, that America in the mid-century, 1950s, 1960s, was, much more equal, or, more united, or more cooperative, or different things. And today we've sort of fallen from that peak that's now behind us. Well, Bob, and to an extent, Bob's book, Bowling Alone, falls into that genre. But what's interesting about the Upswing is what we're doing is we're zooming out quite a bit and looking at not only how did we sort of fall into this downward slide, but what happened before the downturn. And when you zoom the lens out to look at 120, 125 years of history, as you mentioned, going all the way back to the Gilded Age, what emerges is a fascinating pattern. So what we see, this book looks at American society through roughly 4 different lenses. We look at economics, we look at politics, society, and culture, asking the questions, over this 125-year period, was America getting more or less economically equal? Was wealth more or less equally distributed? With regard to politics, were we moving more in the direction of cooperation or more in the direction of competition, polarization, and gridlock? What direction were we moving, and when? With the question of society, were we weaving a tighter social fabric? Were we having stronger family bonds and community bonds, and were we joining more associations or less? And when, how and when did that trend change? And then with culture, were we moving in the direction of more and more altruism, more and more of a sense that we're in this together? Or were we moving more and more toward a sense of I alone, look out for number one? So that's the cultural metric. So when you track all 4 of those metrics, what's shocking is that they follow the same trajectory over this 125-year period. They all start very, very low. America was very polarized, very economically unequal, very, very culturally narcissistic, and extremely dislocated and isolated as a society in the Gilded Age. And then over the course of roughly 60 to 70 years, all of those trends moved in the positive direction, getting better and better and better, more and more equal, more and more cooperative, more and more altruistic, right? And then, amazingly, all of those trends turned at roughly the same moment in the mid-1960s, landing us back today by hard statistical measures in roughly the same place that we were during the Gilded Age. So that's astonishing. First of all, in these different fields, economics, society, politics, and culture, experts know that these trend lines exist. But what's unique about this book is bringing them all together. We see that they actually all track the same trajectory, which is extraordinarily rare when you're looking at social science. And so the message is that there's got to be something going on here. That what is it that made all of these trends turn at the same times? And that's really the story of the book. But as you mentioned, the focus of the book is on that first turn, not the turn from good to bad, but the turn from bad to good. Because if there ever was a historical moment whose lessons we need to learn, it's the moment when the Gilded Age gave way to what historians call the Progressive Era, which engineered this 60 to 70-year upswing.
Yeah, thank you, Shaylin. And then my favorite part about reading the Upswing, which has this nice little thing on the front, if you can see it, of this graph that Shaylin's talking about that tracks with all 4 of these trends, was how you introduced it, the first 3 or 4 pages of the intro are describing something. I was like, okay, they're describing today. And no, it was the Gilded Age. It was a moment that it was kind of a darkly hopeful kind of moment where you were like, we've been here before.
We've been here before. I mean, to a shocking extent. It was my job to really dig into the history of the Gilded Age. And I knew a lot about the Progressive Era coming into this book. I didn't know quite as much about the period that preceded it, which is the Gilded Age. But maybe I could just go through some of those similarities because they really are
that'd be great.
breathtaking. So when it comes to economics, the Gilded Age was characterized by extreme income inequality and class segregation. You had corporate monopolies dominating the economy and growing in size and power. Workers powerless to negotiate on their own behalf. The economy was largely unregulated and sort of careened out of control. Raw materials were being gobbled up. Pollution was, becoming a huge problem. Contaminated products were making it into the marketplace because of a lack of regulation. I mean, do any of those things sound familiar? Eerily so, right? And when you look at politics, there was a relentless zero-sum struggle between the two parties. There was a repeated failure of compromise, and people really had the sense that, politicians couldn't get anything done. And as a result of that, third parties became popular, as well as populism and socialism. On both ends of the spectrum, populism and socialism became sort of these popular alternatives to what felt like a broken political system. And there was just a lot of cynicism about a rigged system, cynicism that the American project had gone off the rails, that the American experiment had been a failure, and a lot of predictions that, we were heading toward tyranny and demagoguery, and this was going to be the end. Again, eerily familiar, right? When you look at the social fabric, it was characterized by loneliness, disillusionment, despair, a lot of nativism, suspicion of people who were not like ourselves, right? Which again, extremely familiar today. And then finally in culture, the period was characterized by what we call social Darwinism. And that was taking the theories of Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest, which he used as a way to describe what he saw as evolution in the biological world. But there were people who were taking that theory and applying it to the social sphere and saying, this is a great way to organize society. Essentially, it's one giant competition, and only the strong will survive. Now, I choose that phrase, only the strong will survive, carefully, because we saw in the news, many people may have seen just in the last 2 days, that is a direct quote from the mayor of Colorado City, Texas, who in response to the crisis that is happening in Texas said, you're on your own. Only the strong will survive. So that was an ethos that characterized that period. It is an ethos that characterizes today. So it is really a striking similarity between where we were then and where we are now. Now, granted, none of those doomsday prophecies came to be. So the question, of course, is why not? And what did Americans do to right the ship, right? And that's what the book is primarily about.
Right, exactly.